Wow, that was different. I'm not used to having a video intro into what we do, but that was cool.
I know it was nifty.
Wow, now it's not cool. Anything that
it's
you say is
it,
nifty, technically,
it's
just can't be cool anymore.
it's retro cool.
It's oh, okay, and that would be a good description of us. So here we are. Do we say our names on this? Do we do it differently? Are we supposed to
I,
like
I
tease it up?
have no clue. I honestly don't go. I mean, we can say our names and just say this, like, welcome to, what's the name of the show? Up from the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's good to know the name of the show before. All right, so yeah, I'm Brent Leary, and
I'm Paul Greenberg.
this is not the CRM players. It's the it's we're up from the rabbit hole. Oh, wait a minute. Let me make it official so that everybody knows that it's not CRM players. Look at that.
Whoa, cool. A
All
mic,
right.
a rabbit, and a camera in the R.
Yeah, it's
Very
it's
cool.
kind of well nifty, I would say.
It's a nifty 50.
Oof. All right. But anyway, folks, yeah, this is the second episode of Up from the Rabbit Hole. We're trying to do this once a month,
Yeah, it's basic for now. Yeah.
and look who is vying for the moment of spin spot on Up from the Rabbit Hole.
Wow, Thomas. All right. Well, Thomas, if you're willing to commit, you can ask us a question the beginning of every show.
Yeah, but Moment of Weber Night doesn't have the same, you know, it's a great
Well,
name, just doesn't have the same moment of
how,
spin
how about
time.
like TW's? Let's see, TW's. I don't know. Thomas,
Hey,
you got a name for your moment? Can't be a moment of. It's got to be something else.
yeah, we got to do act. But technically speaking, I think I named the moment as Finn. So
Yeah, you did,
give me
but
some time and I'll figure it
all right.
out.
Yeah,
And our expert guest is already uh, giving some parameters in the private chat area there.
that's right.
All right. So this is like I said, number uno or dos or whatever we call it.
Dose.
And the first time we talked about sound, right? The
Yes.
audio.
Audio as even more important than video.
And I think everybody was in agreement with that. It kind of sounds funny, but come on. I'm much more likely to watch a video with sketchy kind of video, but the audio is really good versus the audio is terrible. I'm not watching. I don't care how pristine the video is.
And of course, this is the perfect segue into, nonetheless, we don't want your video to be sketchy. We want it
Exactly.
to be really good,
Right.
especially if you're streaming.
Yeah, and we don't want to cause any face palm moments when people look at your video. So
Face palm.
I can actually see Thomas doing that too. So that actually helps. So anyway, this episode we are actually going to focus on what people usually jump to first with video, which is well, video, and the kind of stuff that actually you would want to use to create the video. It could be a webcam, it could be camera, and we are talking about cameras, but we're talking about it for video, right?
Yeah, I mean, the basic look, ultimately, you're at home, most likely. You've decided that you're going to do a show, or your company decided that you're going to speak at a conference for them, virtual conference, or you've decided you just want to have a non-distracting kind of look, where people aren't saying, "Oh, you froze. Oh, it's your camera's not working. Oh, whatever." But we're going to talk to you about how to do it from end to end. What's the lowest possible level? What's the best way you can go about it? And what some of the terms that you're going to continually hear if you decide to make an effort, what they actually mean.
Yeah.
And we'll talk to you about different types of cameras that are available to you.
Yeah, but before we do all that, I am rocking the green Rams hat because it is St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, but show them what you're also wearing, which is even more interesting in a lot of ways.
Oh, the Cleveland Rams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So
that's a long story. It goes back to
tell,
1937.
tell
So,
people a tiny bit about that, though. I think they should hear it just a little.
well, the origin story for my beloved Rams actually did not start in L.A. It started in Cleveland, and it started well before I was born. I just want to point that out.
A little
So
bit,
just
just a
because I'm
little
wearing
bit.
a 1937, that's I wasn't around for that, but I was, I would have rooted for them if I had been. Anyway, so sometimes I like to go retro. I like the history of my franchise, and where did I get this from? Is preps some kind of prepware.com
God
site. Anyway,
knows.
you can get throwback of like all the past teams, or if your team has traversed the country like mine has from Cleveland to LA to St. Louis to LA, you can get every stop. So that's why. But I am also wearing a green, you know, Rams shirt too to go with everything. Anyway, so I just want to point that out. You don't have anything green on, by the way, except your name.
No, I am Jewish, not,
Well,
and I am not. I have no Irish blood in me. In fact, according to my DNA, I am 99.7% Ashkenazi Jew and 0.3% Egyptian, which means my working hypothesis for that, I left my ancestors left Egypt with Moses. That's my that's where I got it from.
wow, that goes
So
quite a ways back.
yep, and migrated somehow to Poland or Russia or one of this Czechoslovakia back in the day.
Damn.
That's that. Well, that's Ashkenazi Jews. That's where they are.
All right.
Sephardic Jews are like Spain and Portugal and places like that.
Well, it's good. Good to know your lineage there. That's
I
pretty
do.
cool. All right. And
97
so
point.
before I turn it over for the venerable Paul Greenberg to introduce our special expert guest, I thought I'd break out the very first real camera I bought. I had forgotten. This is pretty bad of me. I bought this camera about 8 years ago. Let me see if I could show it to you. This is a Canon EOS 7D. I didn't even really know what I was buying, but I wanted a camera for doing video, and I got, I guess, the kit lens. I had no idea. See, I bought all this stuff not knowing what the numbers on the lens really meant, like the focal length or the f-stops. I just said, "Oh, this looks like a good match."
That's a big camera.
Yeah, this is a serious camera. This is several. I don't know. I might have paid close to $1,000 for this at the time, and I had no idea what I was doing. But this is actually the very first camera I got, and I got it specifically for video. Do you remember the very first like real camera you got?
Well, yeah, basically, back in 2016 was the first time I ever bought a camera, and I bought it because it was for photography and some video. And it was bought because Yvonne and I were going on a safari to Tanzania, and Bob Stutz, who had been on a safari, I said, "Did you buy a camera?" He said, "Yeah, the Nikon C900." And I said, "Okay, I'll buy that." And I remember it was like also $900, and that was it. And I used it a lot on the safari. Really, I used the iPhone, but I also used that camera a lot on the safari. It's very good for photographs. Video, not so great.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought, we'll ask our expert guest what his first camera was, but who knows if he'll even remember it. He's got so many. But I turned it over to the venerable Paul Greenberg for today.
Well, I mean, this one you've heard. I mean, I
just saw him this week on In the Hot Seat.
Right. I mean, he's one of us. I mean, he really is. When it boils down to it, he's just one of us. I've known this gentleman since 1996, meaning I am 3 years from now. It will literally be 30 years when he co-authored with me one of my very first book on PeopleSoft 7. He was a manager at PeopleSoft. Since that time, he's run professional services at Autodesk. He was the head of the enterprise group, I'll call it, at IDC, as not just the lead analyst, but the business head of the group also. He's been the chief research officer at G2. He's been there and done that at the practitioner level and at the analyst level for years and years. One of the most respected guys I've ever known when it comes to it. And he is also a spectacularly good photographer. And we'll let him discuss scope of collection at some point. But let's just bring on Mike Fauscette, who you all know as well, also one of the hosts of In the Hot Seat.
And he actually bought cameras to actually take pictures, not like us. So
yeah.
There he is.
He is the man. Once again,
a novel thought, a camera to take a picture.
Who would have thought?
Kind of weird.
That's like using a cell phone to actually call people.
Yeah.
They do that?
Who does that? Who does that?
I just thought this was a fancy camera.
So what was your first camera, for that matter? I'm just like, now Brent's got me going on this.
So two answers to that question. So my first camera when I was 6 or something was a Brownie box camera.
Oh, that's right. I had one of those too.
But my first sort of foray into realness would have been two cameras. Actually, I didn't grab the other one, but here's one of them.
What's that?
That's not the original one, but it is an original M3, Leica M3. So
Leica, okay,
fully mechanical. No meters. With this little thing on top is the add-on meter, and that's the original one too. But it still works today beautifully. And then the other one would have been a Nikon F3, which would have been the common Nikon of the day when I first started shooting real. So,
what year was that?
Yeah, dark ages. That would have been about 73, 4, somewhere in that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this camera is from 1958 to put it
Whoa.
in.
Jesus.
Wow.
Roughly good as the day it popped off the line. So
roughly how much is that worth now?
It's probably 2,500-ish.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on what you get. Like you could get the M6, which is one of the last film Leicas they made, and that one's definitely $3,000 or more usually for that. But and then of course you could move to the digital world of Leica, which again doesn't help us at all with video, but this is 100% black and white film digital camera.
Wow.
That the sensor is literally only black and white. It doesn't actually shoot color. It has no color array. So because of that, it also has insane light sensitivity because of the fact it doesn't have that extra array in front of it. So
amazing.
Man.
All right,
but you can't do video with that one either. So
well, figure it this way though. So a lot of the people who would listen in are going to be listening for one of two reasons when it comes to the camera. One would be video, meaning shooting video, going out and vlogging or shooting B-roll or whatever. And then the other one would be to use a camera to stream.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And or sometimes not even to stream per se, to be seen on a Zoom meeting. Yeah. And there are obviously lots of levels, from built-in, webcams on a laptop or a PC, all the way up to, if you want to, you can spend, I don't know. I think Brent, didn't you find the camera was like $180,000 or something at one point?
I put it on layaway.
Yeah.
We'll get it in the year 2000.
Way away.
Yeah.
Lay it as far as I can get it.
I put it on stay away. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, stay away. I mean, you can get cameras in that entire range, but the real question is, you have somebody out there, they're trying to figure out what's the first thing they should do. And they've decided minimally that I don't want the video to be a distraction. I just want to look pretty good. Yeah. What do they do?
Well, so there are a couple of answers to that. I guess one of the other things is if your answer is you really just want the video to look good, and you're not probably gonna drop this in your pocket and go take a picture of, downtown somewhere of a parade or whatever, then I would say, and this is going to be a little bit of a controversial one, but I would probably go with what I think is a really good sort of vlogging design camera that is pretty multi-purpose. And that's the Sony RX100. I think they're up to version 7 now or something. It's a zoom, a built-in zoom lens, small camera. It's a crop sensor, but it does go to f2.8, and it's it's a good basic camera for that.
Okay, so there's two things you said that if somebody who's at that level, they're not going to know what you meant. One is
you're right.
crop sensor, and the other one is f2.8. Right.
Okay.
So kind of explain that to people.
Yeah. Let me start with sensors, and I'll go back to the original sensor, which is the 35 millimeter film. And of course, film is just the sensor, except of course you only get to use your sensor once and in that camera. But the sensor size is what we're talking about when you talk about crop sensor, full frame. So a full frame sensor mirrors the size of the negative of a original 35 millimeter camera. So it is naturally the size built for the lens that you're using, right? Yeah.
Full frame.
Yeah. And the camera that you see me on is full frame. It's a Sony A7C, and then here's another full frame. It's a Sony A7R4. So, standard full frame. Then what you have is slightly smaller sensor called an APS-C, that starts into the crop sensors, but that's a pretty good size sensor in most Panasonics. I think they do make some full frames now, right? But most of your Panasonics are going to be, there you go. So that's an APS-C sensor, and again, good quality, but you don't get quite as much resolution, and you don't get quite the detail that you could get if you have a bigger sensor. I mean, it's like if you were a photographer back in the day, you use 35 millimeter film, that's fine. But if you wanted to really get better and make a much, richer picture, you would use what's called a medium format camera. And that has a 6 centimeter or so, because it's that 120 film. You see cameras that go all the way from 6 centimeters to by 12 to 6 by 9 to 6 by 7 to 6 by 6, and 6 by 6 is the perfect square. That's what Hasselblad has always used in their film cameras. Was that
but I'm just take it from this standpoint. So I'm just streaming. The only thing I ever had was the webcam that was associated with my either PC or laptop. I want to step it up to either a better webcam or some basic thing. Like, for example, the camera you see in my shot right now was the first camera I ever used to live stream, and that's a Panasonic GH5. And the reason for that is that's, of course, what they call MFT. It's 4.3. It's a ratio. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that now. But the thing that it did for me was it just gave me a better picture straight out than any webcam I've used. It handled light better. The focus wasn't great, but all in all, I could do things like, you see me in this, which is actually a Panasonic GH6, which is the next thing. Right now, there are downsides to that, which we're not getting into right now. But the idea is that this is what. So you have a full frame camera. I have a MFT. I have a 4.3, and Brent, you've got a full frame, right?
Yeah, I'm using the box camera, the Panasonic.
Right. So 2 full frames, MFT, and basically there's no and you can actually see, if you're just sort of visually looking, you can sort of see a difference. But I mean, part of that's just due to the lighting you each have. But ultimately, all of these cameras will do a very good job
Yep.
if you're doing all the other things right too.
I'm gonna put up a second box of me that'll be using the built-in webcam from the Apple Studio display.
All right, why don't you put that up so people?
Yeah,
can
that's a good
see it?
comparison actually, because then you can start to see, and then then you can point out some things like when you talked about, you asked about aperture, for example. That's a good example of an inability to control an aperture, which would be your built-in webcam. So what's aperture? Aperture is the size of the adjustable size of the opening of the little diaphragm inside of the lens, right? So you open it to let in more light, you close it to let in less light. And that's why you hear people talk about f 1.2, f 1.4, f 2.8. Those bottom numbers are how big the aperture gets to let in more light, and then it gets the larger number, like an f16 for example, lets in less light. But the light's not the only issue with the aperture. The aperture gives you control over one other really important thing. That's your ability to blur the background, or bokeh. So my camera's got a G Master Sony 35 millimeter f1.4. It's at 1.8 right now. But if I change that, if I move it the other direction, you can see that it will shift the way that background effect works, right? It's because it'll give you more or less blurring. If I can reach the actual ring. There it is. Yeah. So let me move it the other way for a second. See if I can tell.
Yeah, I'll show you a little bit while you're working on that. I'll show. You'll notice the background here is a little more blurred than the background here, right? And this is a different camera. It's a Blackmagic Pocket 6K G2, and it's a 35 millimeter thing, meaning it's basically a bigger sensor than the Panasonic sensor. Okay, meaning, so to Mike's point, you can play with more light. It allows for that blurry background depending on how you set it up. But this is an example of a slightly blurry background. It's not meant to be more than it is. Where this is just, normal.
Yeah, that's normal. And I like it set about like this, right? So that's just off its widest setting. So that's like an f1.8, which gives you a nice blurry background. So you see I go out of focus right behind me, and then in front of me I would go out of focus. But the zone is decent sized in the middle. If you go too large, then your focus zone is really tiny, especially the bigger the sensor. The bigger the sensor, the smaller the range of that focus, front and back. So like a medium format digital camera, you can get really thin so that just the tip of my nose is in focus and the rest of me would be blurry. Yeah. And that's and if you wanted to do that, that would be fine. Of course, video, not likely you want to do that. So so aperture and sensor size. And of course, if you were shooting regularly, you'd worry about shutter speed, but since you're in video, you're not worried about shutter speed.
Right.
And ISO, which is sensitivity of the sensor or the film. That started in film. And so the higher the rating, the less light you can use. So like if it's an ISO 100, that's kind of a regular studio with lighting and all of that. But if you were shooting in low light, it might jump up to ISO 800 or 1600, or some cameras like that Leica I showed you, the monochrome, it can go up to 100,000, which is insane. Like it can nearly see in the dark. But you lose quality the higher the ISO, the less the quality of the picture, because it gets essentially it's grainy. It's not really grain because obviously that's a film term. It's noise. It's just noise on the sensor.
Hey, Sarbjeet mentions that he uses a Canon M50 mirrorless as his webcam. Do you have any experience with that one?
Not that specific model, but I have used Canons, and they have a newer mirrorless out that's supposed to be pretty good now. And Nikon does too. What's the 7X7, something like that, I think is the latest one. And those are both good cameras. And Canon, I mean, you mentioned the 7D. And
Yeah.
it is, he's right, camera, mic, lighting, but I'd also throw in their lens because that's the other
Yeah.
variable. And so that Canon 7D, which I had a Canon 7D, actually, when I first started back shooting many years ago, because I had taken kind of a hiatus after I, kind of went in different directions from my original desire to be a professional. And then I bought that 7D. It's a great camera. It's crop center, but it's a great camera. It's an APS-C camera. And then I moved to the 5D, which is a great full frame camera. And then I was back in Leica for a while, because I admit I go back to Leica land quite often, but you don't do video with that.
Wait, there's a Leica land?
Yeah, there's a Leica land. It's amazing. It's a fun place. It's a fun place, but the entrance fee is so expensive. Because that combo
$11,000.
This combo right here is about probably just over $10,000.
Whoa!
And how much of that is the lens?
About 3,500, 4,000 worth of it is.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a 51.4 Summilux, so it's it's a Leica lens, expensive.
Speaking of lens, Paul, Sahil is asking you, what do you?
Oh, hold on a second. I literally have to look.
Okay.
Oh, I'm using. Okay, I'm actually using for the GH6. I'm using a Panasonic kit lens, really, which is a 1260. I always use zoom on my anything with streaming, because that way I can focus in and out, and it gives me much more quality. So, for example, look, this is all the way out, and you start seeing what the room looks like. There's the light over there, etc.
So that's
blue panel.
And it helps. I mean, I think being able to adjust and using I usually use primes, but so it's fixed lens, but I have a different solution to your problem. Instead of changing the lens focal length, I move the camera mount is attached to a pole, and I can just move it in. I can't
do that. So, this room won't work.
Like I can take her back a little bit more if you want, or I can bring her up.
Yeah, and see that, which actually goes to the other point about the cameras, right? I mean, look, if you really want to get down to like, and this goes to Sarbjeet's use of the Canon M50 too, because I've never used the camera, but I know about the camera because it was something I researched pretty heavily when I was doing the work. So first and foremost, when it comes to planning out your camera, and let's say the only purpose for the camera is to make sure you can be on Zoom and it works well, okay, and that's it. Then you know what? Just get a good webcam. You can get a good webcam. You can get a great webcam. I mean, the standard everyone uses at the low end is the Logitech 920, right? And it'll give you 1080p. It'll do what it has to do. It's an okay one. It doesn't do much, but it's okay. If you're going up on the webcam side, you could go to the Elgato Facecam. You can go jump even higher to the Insta360, which runs $300, right? Which is high for a webcam, but it does a lot. It does tracking, it does zoom, it does all kinds of things. It's got hand gestures, which drive me crazy because turns out one of my natural hand gestures triggers tracking, right? So, but you can use a webcam. But what you'll see, to Brent's point, it's kind of what you're seeing on the studio display. You lose detail, right? You just lose detail. And it's a little more washed out.
Yeah, because Thomas made a comment about that. Yeah, right. Let's put it like this. I mean, this is the webcam that came with the Apple Studio display, and for a webcam, it's pretty good. But you got to think about it. I mean, some of the cameras. Well, Mike just mentioned one of his cameras is about $7,000 or thereabouts. That's you're getting a webcam. Traditionally, you can get a decent webcam for $50, and a really good one could go $200 or $300. That's still a drop in the bucket to what we're talking about with some of these cameras.
Well, and then that goes to the other point, really, which is what do you first and foremost, you have to figure out what you want to do, right, and why you're doing it. I mean, if you're gonna run a show and you want that show to have an audience and you want the look and feel of the show to be meaningful, because there's an emotional response one way or the other from the person who's watching, then you're going to have to put some money into the camera, and you're going to have to put some money into the lens, and you have to put some money into all the other things. Be quiet, Alexa. And you're going to have to put some money into the other things too, right? Like the lighting and the mics and so on. But ultimately, you have to make a decision on what's your purpose first and foremost. And then you go from the low end of a webcam all the way up to, I mean, there are people who are using very high, who are not professionals, but are producing very high quality shows that are using cameras that are video cameras. They can be cinema cameras. They could, and for example, this is a low end cinema camera, but it's $4,000 just for the camera, right? The beast of a lens on the right is the Sigma 2470, a zoom lens, and that's another beast of a lens, right? There's an audio thing on the top of that, and that will handle your mics. I mean, this rig will cost you $5,000 all in all. But that, if I'm shooting video, if I'm live streaming, it'll not so much. I would say more shooting video than live streaming in this case. But this is a great camera for that purpose, and it's a way to start where you're primarily focused on video. So all in all, you make that decision first. And by the way, if you're interested in kind of kicking it up, one of the great cameras to kick it up to, at least according to the research, is what Sarbjeet is using, the Canon M50. When that is what basically is kind of one of the opening to, it's like beginning to intermediate kind of, meaning really good camera for what you get for the price. It's a great camera for the price. Yeah. It's not going to do things the highest end do, but it'll do exactly what you want and be better than a webcam by a long shot.
It has a good sensor. It's going to be representative. I mean, if you're traveling around a lot and you want something and you get a kind of a unique look to your show, this GoPro is a great choice. And what, $450 for a Hero 11 now? Great choice, and really portable. It streams directly to your Mac or PC with an app that runs in there that makes it a streaming cam, and it has its built-in microphone. It's pretty good if you use the media kit with it. Nice little microphone, or you can plug in a mic. Even comes with a little light. So I mean, I think that's good. But the other thing somebody mentioned, Paul, and I think this is good to bring out to you, we're talking about definitions. Somebody mentioned that you can tell the difference if you look at the everything we have up here. Everybody looks slightly different because of the color temperature of the lighting, and that's something you control. But white balance, you set it auto on your camera and you control it yourself with your lighting. Or if you're in the natural world without extra lighting, you're using the camera to control what you want from a sensitivity standpoint, so color temperature standpoint. So yours, Paul, you look a little warmer. Mine definitely looks a little cooler because I tend to set the lighting a little bit more towards the blue end, and yours is a little more towards the brown end. So it depends on what you like from a look perspective, and you can change it. Like I can manipulate my lights all sorts of ways back here.
Oh yeah. Sahil, so on my BS1H, I believe I use a lot of primes like Mike, I guess.
Yeah.
Mainly because my studio is a fixed environment, and you can pretty much, although I'm still trying to figure out what I want fixed, you can kind of set up, if you have, depending on what your budget is, you can set up the way you want it to look and not have to worry too much about zooming in and out. If pretty much this is going to always be here and this is going to always be there. Yeah. I think I have 2 zooms, but I have the majority of my lenses are prime, and I think what I'm using on this one is a 50, and I believe it's 1.4.
Okay, so why don't you guys explain 50, 16, those things, so people understand what that even means?
The simple way to explain this, because there's a complicated way to explain it that I'll avoid, but because the size of the sensor matters, and if you have a smaller sensor, it changes the focal length that the lens sees. But the idea is basically the lens is manufactured so that it has a certain field of view, and that varies depending on it, what the lens is. So like I said, I'm on a 35 1.4. That's what you see here. And then this is a great inexpensive alternative if you're a Sony person. This is a 50. It's a 2.5, but it's a great lens, and it's probably less than $300. And it also has, which is really kind of cool if you're doing video, you can turn this off, and so the aperture click is off now, so it doesn't make a noise.
Yeah.
So this one, can you hear that?
Yeah, we can hear it.
You just pop that switch down, and
wow. Yeah.
wide as it can be. Which
by
is
the
a
way,
big
so I forgot the brand name. That's a Sigma lens. I don't. Maybe we should talk a little bit. Well, I mean, I don't know. We could be here for hours.
Well, first let's still finish the.
Let's finish the
30, 35.
Yeah,
what that means.
So it basically is field of view, right? So that number, like a 35 millimeter, is a fairly wide angle. If you go to 28, 24, I mean, you get down to even 9 millimeter, although that usually is kind of fisheye, so you wouldn't want to use that for video unless you want to look really weird.
Hey, Mike, can you talk about that? Because when you say 35 is kind of wide, but 9 is wide, it doesn't sound right. That's the thing that was throwing me off. Why is 9 wider than 35?
The longer the focal length, the more the lens's capability to reach out for longer distances and make things magnified. So the focal length, then, if it's a 70 or a 100 or a 1000, like a wildlife photographer might use a 1000, and you could take pictures of fleas at a mile if you needed to do that, I guess. I don't know, but like this one you mentioned, 24 to 70. This is a 24 to 70, but it's a f2.8, so it's a beast. Like I can use this, but I have to actually use an extra tripod because it's just too damn heavy to use as a regular. Like my desk mount that I use with the 35, my camera just kind of slowly sinks as I use it because it's too heavy. But if you go that smaller number, then wider angle goes to bigger numbers, is longer focal length. So you don't have a broad view, you have a more narrow view, but it magnifies more. Does that make sense?
It does. It just, when you first hear it's like,
it seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, the 35 would seem to be wider than the 9, and then why is the lens that's a 1.2 so much bigger than the one that's a 2.8? It always, that's what originally threw me off with this stuff.
Right, and I mean, you can easily see, like, look at the monstrous size of the lens to my head. And that's this 2.8 in a 24 to 70 zoom, and it's a fixed 2. So its bottom end always stays at 2.8. Some zooms, the actual the aperture changes. Your bottom aperture changes, or how open it can get changes by focal length. So you'll see some lenses, it'll be like it's a 24 to 70 f2.8 to f3.6 or whatever, right? So that's one thing. And then if you look at this is the 50 2.5. This is that 24 to 70 2.8. So this actually does get a slightly wider, but it's only one focal length, so it doesn't have to adjust to all these incremental other ones. So that's why it is set up the way it is.
The lens on the right compared to the lens on the left, both for the same camera, compared to the lens that's already on it. The lens on the right is the Sigma 2470 f2.8. Right. And it's similar. Just that thing weighs about 80 pounds.
Yeah,
right? At least it feels like it weighs 80 pounds. But but the interesting thing to me, though, is, I mean, look, so all right, so we know obviously how wide a field you have is going to matter, right? Mm-hmm. How well the camera does depending on the lighting is going to matter. We know that how the color saturation looks is going to matter. And as you pointed out, when it comes to, white balance, which is basically how it looks, I guess, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but pretty much what would it look like in daylight, basically?
It's essentially against that theory, right? It's against a fixed color temperature, which is just color of light, right? You call color temperature light, is measured in color temperature from cold to warm. cold being bluish or more white. That's probably the way to think of it. And more warm goes more brownish yellow.
Orange, brown.
Brown, yeah, exactly right. And so you have to find what looks good for you, for your skin tone, for your studio, whatever. I tend to like colder light, but a lot of people, and then I adjust mine sometimes too. If I'm doing something where I want to make it feel a little warmer, then I take the light and temperature to the warm side a bit. It's just, and the nice thing about that is you do it with the studio lighting. You don't have to bother doing it in camera. You can do it in camera. It's just harder to manipulate once you're in the studio kind of environment.
Yeah. I mean, basically, the camera is going to absorb everything it sees, right? Whatever it is in the field that it's looking. And so if the field is a real field, meaning you're outside and you're trying to take a video outside, it's going to see, depending on what the lens, 16 millimeter, 24 millimeter, whatever, 200 millimeter, it's going to see a portion of that field. It's going to take in the lighting. It's going to take in the color. It's going to take in all the things it sees. And your job as a videographer in that case is to basically make it see what you take all of that information, adjust the camera so that it sees what you want it to see. Right. And that's what it is. The other thing is when you're in a studio and streaming, it's different circumstance, because to Brent's point, a studio is like it's a fixed position. You're not moving around in the field. You're not changing. You can do a lot in that studio, but like here, I'm limited right now to roughly, I think it's 9 by 10 by 10, which is a small space, right? You'd think it sounds pretty wide, but it really isn't. And so, for example, when it comes to how I have to think about all this, for example, is how to Mike, your point of using something that moves the camera around. I don't have the space to do that with what I have here. So I have to use a zoom lens rather than a prime lens, because that allows me to adjust the camera, so to speak, without moving the actual camera, by just moving the lens in and out. Now, you lose some things because of that, but at the same time, that's how you have to do it. When it comes to, for example, another thing, there's another kind of camera, which I only recommend if you're kind of advanced. It's called PTZ, which is this camera. It's pan, tilt, zoom. This camera will automatically adjust without, it doesn't have a zoom. It has a zoom lens, but you're not adjusting anything. You're digitally, via app or whatever, you're making it go, you're making it go up, down, this way, and this way. All three of those are built right into the camera, right? Mm-hmm. And I have a sub studio in my office, and what you're seeing here, for example, I'm controlling from here, right? And so, here, I'll show you something. I'd like to show you something. So this is being controlled from here. This is a slider with a camera on it, adjusted to the light, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little choppy right now, as you can see, but that's only because it's the first time I'm using it. But you get the idea. I mean, the idea is you have to take the space you have and work with it. And the best way when it comes to the cameras is, look, there's no point in you getting a lens that says 70 millimeters, 200 millimeters in a studio, right? It's not going to do you a whole lot of good. You basically will be taking a picture of your eye or of your retina if you go deeper. And that's about it, right? So you're going to have to think about the lens. You have to think about your lighting, all of those things. That said, if you're actually interested in making it part of the experience as opposed to, just making it, let's say, not hurting the experience, just avoiding distraction, you have to be prepared to spend the money to do it too. And what we can do for you, if you're interested in, is recommend all different levels from the base to the top of those kind of cameras.
So, Paul, a couple of other things we didn't talk about that I think are important for people to know. This one, for example, the focus.
Oh yeah, good point.
because that autofocus, that continuous focus, has to be really good in the camera to stream effectively. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly fighting. Now, I bought this originally. This is a Fuji X100V. It's a great camera. It's a 23 millimeter fixed lens. It streams directly to an app on your computer, which seems great, but the autofocus lags terribly. So while it's a fine camera to use to take pictures, I don't recommend it for streaming because it just doesn't adapt fast enough when you move around, right? Because you're moving, the focus has to stay with you. So that continuous focus, absolutely critical to the camera's function, and that'll break a camera faster than anything for me is laggy autofocus. Because you can't, obviously. Now, I actually have a remote for my Sonys, and I could actually do it mechanically if I wanted, because I have this little button that I can't reach. Oh, there it is. I can't reach it on my desk, but this thing, and you can control the cameras from that. Even if you get the right zoom lens, you can even control the zoom from that. But I don't use it because this thing has such good autofocus that you saw it'll adapt really quickly.
Yeah. That was one of the big hangouts for the Panasonic line. It gives a great image, but it really was way behind both Sony and Canon for autofocus. Now, the one that I think Paul mentioned earlier on, the S5 II and 2X, boy, we are going down a rabbit hole, because the reason why the Panasonics had been really bad for autofocus was because they used contrast autofocus and not phase detect, which is way better. That's what Canon and Sony both have. And finally, Panasonic put it in these latest batch of cameras. So finally, we'll have good autofocus, because, that's been the thing that's been the biggest challenge for me.
It is a real challenge. And the other thing, Brent, that they've done now is you start to see hybrid autofocus that does both.
Yeah,
I think that's what it does. Optimum message, which the optimum method, which is the best way to do it, because then because there are times when phase detection doesn't pick up certain types of light versus contrast. So that's good. The other thing that we didn't really mention, and this is probably another show, but I'll just mention it because it makes a big difference in what the quality of it is how you're streaming the camera into your computer to get it out of line. Man. And like right now, I'm set up using a Roland VR1 HD AV mixer, and my camera is actually connected directly to that, which connects to my computer, and then it also gives me the capability to switch to whatever that bottom screen is on my computer. Right, I can switch back, and I can do fancy stuff too, like this. Like, I'm in there. See, right. Which is cool. And so that's one. I know you guys use a different brand, but the same idea, right? Using a mixer can help. Or you mentioned Elgato. Elgato makes a great little tiny dongle, basically, that you can put in an HDMI cable and run it directly to your computer, and you don't need the mixer, which I often use when I'm traveling, which is a nice setup too. So.
Yeah, I mean the thing with cameras, Sarbjeet was right that it takes camera, mic, lighting, and also the mic's point too, the lens, to really make this all work. I mean, we're obviously focused on the cameras, and it's actually a really complicated subject just generally, because ultimately it's the thing that's putting the picture out there with the lens, right? With the camera and the lens working together are the thing that people are viewing from, right? So it gets kind of tricky. And I would say this, though. I mean, one thing that I think is really important is, look, when I'm, like, for example, when we're doing our happy hours, which you're all invited to, by the way, 3:30 p.m. every Wednesday, just go on LinkedIn. You'll see the notices. Register. You'll get a recurring link. When we do those, I literally just work off a webcam that I have set up on the top of my PC. It's called the Insta360. It's pricey, and if you look at the quality difference, it's noticeably not the quality of this. And I have okay lighting. I don't have great lighting there either. I use one light, and I have good audio, but that's it really. But the reality is, for that kind of purpose, it does. Nobody sits there and says, you have terrible video, or, or they basically are okay with what they see.
Well,
Right.
I say that's just me. I say, "Ooh, that video is
Right.
terrible."
Well, that's okay. You can say it. Right.
That
But
doesn't look like you're in Leica land. I'm sorry.
no, that's
Right.
right. Like a land. I had one of those Kodak cameras where you had to take that horrible smelling thing, one of the first Insta cameras, and then you had to rub it on the picture. And that stuff was horrible smelling. Oh my God. It was awful. But the reality is, look, I mean, you got to deal with cameras. I mean, you're going to deal with a camera one way or the other if you're going to broadcast with pictures. So yeah, it's just a matter of deciding A, avoid distraction, B, part of the experience, C, work my way up from avoiding distraction to an experience. And then from there, there's a million options. And we can obviously always help you, but
and budget ends up being a big player in a lot of that too, right? Because like if I know I need something that's kind of all purpose and I've only got $1,000 to spend, what am I going to buy is very different than I need something that's very specific to a studio, and I've got $10,000 to spend. Like it's a completely different conversation, right? Because like that RX100 I mentioned at the beginning, that little Sony RX100 pocket camera, zoom lens, great streaming camera, really good autofocus, and what, $800, $900, something like that, you can get it for. So that's a good alternative if you don't want to spend a lot of money. But if you are willing to spend more, like this Sony A7C, it's a compact camera, 24 megapixel, full frame sensor, and I think it was, I don't know, $1,500 or something. It's a really good deal in the Sony brand. Because if you go up to like the A7R, 62 megapixel, great camera, but it's $3,800 or whatever it is now. Yeah. So there's a big difference. And for streaming, 20-ish megapixels tends to be fine. Like it's enough, it's enough resolution. Now, is it better if you do more? Yeah, it is, but only a few people would notice the difference.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so maybe what we can do to kind of close the show would be recommend cameras at different levels, starting with webcams, by the way, and then working our way kind of up. So why don't each of us come through with one or two recommendations? Let's start with avoid distraction webcam and avoid distraction camera.
My studio display that's built into a little webcam built into the Apple Studio display works great for me. I mean, I have that's what I usually use. And
that would be, I mean, but what would you have someone buy? Because that would be a $3,000 webcam. They have to buy the studio, right?
Well, I mean,
which webcam would you just have someone out there buy?
I think you mentioned the Elgato. That one's, I've got that. I don't use it, but that's only because I got this now. Right. I think that's a pretty good one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mike, what about you on the webcam?
I'd say two answers to that. The first one is the true webcam. I've had a Logitech. It's like 1080p. It's fine. It does okay. It has good autofocus. It got a digital zoom, so I can change the focal length a bit. It's fine. I mean, it doesn't blur the background because you don't have control over the aperture and blah, blah, all the other stuff, but it's fine. And then the other one is I actually still really like the GoPro as a webcam. It makes a really nice, simple webcam that it has a wide field of view and you can control it a little bit digitally, but not a ton. So some of that's going to be where you put it, right? So you're going to have to move it closer and et cetera, but not a bad webcam at all.
Okay, and I go with what Brent mentioned, Elgato's face cam. I use that for a while. I'm now using the Insta360, but it's mostly just because I'm geeking at this point. I mean, it's got a lot of other features that you don't get on any other camera, but the Elgato face cam, which is a $200 webcam, is actually a really good webcam. You have a lot of control over it with an app that comes with anything. The Elgato's comes with the face cam. It's a camera hub, and look, honestly, anything Elgato produces is good. I have yet to see a bad item from those people.
Agree.
And they are geared to streaming. So I would say definitely Elgato face cam. All right. What about early, let's say, maybe a little more than avoid distraction camera, but not going.
So sub $1,000 basically.
Yeah, say good. Yes.
RX100 for me. That would be the Sony RX100. I think is such a great compromisey camera for under $1,000. That I would think that's probably, and the other one I would say is you could also probably get an A7C used on eBay or one of the other marketplaces, KEH or something, for under $1,000, or at least right around $1,000. But then you don't have a lens; you'd have to buy the lens. But with the RX100, you got the lens, everything all in one package for $800 or whatever it is now.
Ben, what do you think?
I mean, I remember buying the Sony A6400, and that was, I think I got that for $800, and that's still really good because the autofocus in that thing is rock solid. So that so I just go with that.
And actually, to your point on the A6400, there's this thing that when you're out doing videos, that kind of helps do the videos. It's in-camera image stabilization, meaning it adjusts so that when you're walking, it settles. The A6600 from Sony has it. The A6400 doesn't. But the good news is you don't need that in the studio.
Yeah,
right?
You don't
in the studio, it's just sitting there. The camera's not moving. So you don't fall for buying, like I did. Don't fall for buying image stabilization as a need for live streaming. It's a need for when you're a videographer, but it isn't. Well, it's a good thing to have when you're a videographer, but it's not a need. And the A6400 is a great choice. The other one, honestly, is Sarbjeet's camera. Is actually, again, I haven't used it, but that's a really good camera. I will say, when I was looking in the early days of doing all this, the most single recommended camera was the Canon M50, and there's a Mark II version, which I don't know what the improvements are, but all of them are sub $1,000 cameras, and absolutely well worth it. All right, now let's go upstream. Just in the interest of time, let's take it all the way upstream to if you really wanted to be part of the camera as part of the experience itself.
Well, I'm just speaking on what I bought in the past, and I bought a lot of these. I don't even know which look at. I mean, because of the way these lenses are positioned, like it looks like I'm trying to take a picture of myself, myself, which is kind of weird. Think about it. No, this is I like this for a number of reasons. This is the Panasonic Lumix BS1H. It's basically the box equivalent to their flagship S1H. I bought a lot of these. I would say the average price is probably for $2,400, which I think they retail for $3,500, and maybe they're starting to come down now. But I like this because it's, I can set this up nicely in a studio, but also it's so easy to carry around. You can slap a lens on that sucker and put it on a little tripod like I do, and it's very easy to carry around. The other good thing I like about this is it's PoE. So if you plug into a switcher that can provide energy, then that's one less thing you have to worry about, which is really great. And if you are thinking about streaming, you want to think about that. You might want to think about, does it plug in? And the other thing is, this is one of the things I like. Okay, it's got a USB-C, which is really important these days, and it's got a full HDMI. I don't like cameras that have that mini HDMI. It's
okay. So two things on that. First, PoE stands for Power over Ethernet, meaning you can plug it into an Ethernet switch or port, and not only will it connect to your network, but it'll also power the actual camera. If you remember that this PTZ camera, that's how that works too. It's the same thing. Okay, the other thing is HDMI. We won't go into the details now, but that's when we actually go into the details of video as opposed to cameras. But what that basically, you take a cable, you plug it into an HDMI port on the camera, you plug it into something else, and that will allow, typically that will output what's the camera will then send a signal via that cable to whatever you plugged it into, which will then show what the camera sees, right? And that's what HDMI does that for the most part. That's a mini HDMI mini.
And then this
cable.
is a regular size one.
Right,
yeah.
right. So that's that. I would say from mine, okay, so for in the studio, I'm very happy with the cameras I have. Really, now again, you have to allow for the fact Panasonic's autofocus isn't great. So I have the Panasonic GH6, which runs, what's that running now? 2400, I think, 2500.
That's
maybe it's 2000, something like that. I don't remember exactly, but I have it on manual focus, and I've adjusted it accordingly. The other camera I have is the the Blackmagic Pocket 6K G2 is actually a cinema camera. It runs I think it ran 2000 also. It's really well priced. And the reason I have that one, and again, it's a little more complex. What you're seeing here involves what's called a lookup table. I won't go into details, but let's just say if you're looking at the natural image coming directly from the camera, it's going to be grayish, right? But I added color, and it broadcasts the color. And that's what you're seeing there. And this camera does a really good job of that. The one thing I will say is on the road, if you're traveling, to date, I've used the Panasonic GH5 Mark II. And the reason for that is the Panasonic GH5 Mark II streams directly from the camera to via RTMP, custom RTMP and RTMP, and to a source that outputs via the internet to wherever. So I don't even need a mixer. I don't need anything else. I just simply need the camera, and it'll do it by itself. And that's why I take it on the road, minimizes all the other equipment. I'm looking forward to replacing that with the one that Brent and I have been talking about, which is that Panasonic S5 Mark IIX, because that one will do the same thing and also has the best autofocus I've seen in a long time. So and that one, so 2000 a piece for these two, the GH6 and the G2, and that Mark IIX runs 2500, I think. So those would be my recommendations when you're going on the upper end. There are other ones, but for now, I don't think they're too complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Sony guy, so I mean,
Me
my
too.
answer would be
Sony or Panasonic.
most likely, yeah. And so the Sony, I mentioned the A7C with the G Master lens. So if you bought this 35 millimeter or the 50, whichever one you liked better, I mean, you're probably, the whole combination is probably $4,000-ish. Great camera, 24 megapixel, lightweight, smaller because it's, the compact body. Great camera. If I didn't care about what I spent and I didn't want to buy a pure sign camera, because if I was going to do that, I'd probably do Blackmagic. But if I was just going to go regular, I'd use that A7R4 that I showed you. This camera, fantastic, 62 megapixel sensor. The autofocus is just that fast. So great camera. And then the other sort of weird one, and I used to own an old version of this, but I'll just show it because I think it's interesting, is this camera. It's this Sony fixed lens camera, but it's a full frame camera, the RX1, and it is about $3,200, but you get a really nice, it's a 42 megapixel sensor. You get an f2 35 millimeter lens on it. It does HD 60p, so it does decent video. The autofocus is great, and like $3,200, and you could probably get it a little less than that, maybe 3 or less in H, and that comes with everything, so you're good to go.
I think one last thing, just keep in mind, we're talking, everyone listening, keep in mind, we're talking not so much about going in the field and shooting video as much as we are streaming here. So,
Yep.
and we'll probably have a show where we actually talk about going in the field and shooting video, and that's going to be a different set. I mean, there'll be some overlap, of course, but there'll probably be a different set of cameras involved in that.
Yeah,
And
you mentioned lighting too. I mean, LumeCube is a good place to look if you don't really know much about lighting. You can get some really nice video focused lights for your desk that just clamp on, and they give you color temperature control, and they're nice. And I've got probably have a dozen of the assorted LumeCube lighting laying around, some for travel, some for desks, that sort of thing. But that's a good addition to any camera. So
yeah, and maybe the next time we'll touch on accessories, because you could go down another rabbit hole on that whole thing, cages or audio. We didn't even talk about how do you get the audio into your camera, the best, do you want an XLR adapter on your camera and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so
I'm sure we'll get there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you will, I'm sure.
The rabbit hole is deep.
Yes, it is. The sinkhole. Up from the sinkhole.
All right. Well, we went past the hour.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if we probably could go a couple other hours depending on what we dig into, but now let's we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, and keep in mind, everyone out there, we're kind of learning how to do the show as we go too. So we need some feedback and advice from you, what you want to know about, and also what we need to do better too. Let us know.
Absolutely. All right. Well, this is episode number 2 in the books, Up from the Rabbit Hole, although I feel like I'm still in it.
That's just a lifelong thing with us, right?
I don't feel like I'm going up. I think I'm going the other way.
That's right. Wow, it just got 3 feet deeper.
Yeah. Which way is up again? Wait a minute. That's a segment for another show.
Yes.
All right. Well, we definitely appreciate having the expertise of Mr. Fauscette join us today, because he's an old school photog, not
knows his stuff.
Absolutely.
Well,
all right.
fun. I really appreciate you guys asking me too. Fun.
Oh,
me, I always talk
great.
cameras.
Absolutely. No, this has been
be
really
having you
helpful. I'm
back.
sure you'll be back to talk more, actually.
Plan on it.
All right. Well, we still don't have like an official ending to this. So how about bye until the next time?
That works. We could always run the intro as an outro.
Maybe we can get a picture of Patrick. So since we got many to end players, we could get Patrick.
Oh, that's a good idea. Get Patrick with a camera.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Well, Rebecca, we'll be reaching out to you.
And I think Patrick wants a full frame.
That's right.
Anyway, all right, folks. Thanks again. And next time you see us, hopefully we'll be in Vegas for Adobe Summit. We'll see how that works.
Yep, we got some things planned. Watch for it, but they're not related to this show.
No. And on that note, goodbye. We'll see you.
Bye.